I'm Dave Baker.
And I'm Spandrew Spice.
Welcome to Deep Cuts, the podcast where we pick a topic and walk you through the ins, the outs, and the nitty-gritty, so you can appear like an interesting and idiosyncratic person at your next forced social function. Today's topic is...
Hiroo Onoda.
Who was Hiroo Onoda? He was a second lieutenant in the Japanese Imperial Army during World War II, but instead of ending his fight following Japan's surrender, he kept fighting for 29 years after the war had ended. And throughout those 3 decades, he initiated guerrilla warfare against a Philippine island, killing up to 30 civilians in the process over a war that was already over.
Act 1. The Soldier That Time Forgot. Hiroo Onoda was born on March 19th, 1922 in Kainan, Japan to Tenjiro and Tamei Onoda. After turning 17, he spent time in Wuhan, China, known as Hankow and occupied by the Empire of Japan at the time. But he returned to Japan in May of 1942 after he was drafted into the Japanese Imperial Army during World War II. In the midst of his training, he was singled out to attend the Nakona School for Intelligence Officers, where he studied guerrilla warfare as well as covert operations, philosophy, martial arts, and propaganda. We got a photo of Hiroo Onoda. It's a photo of him in his military uniform.
Hiroo Onoda looks like the type of guy that says children should be seen and not heard.
Oh yeah, 100%. 100% he does. Honestly, there's not a whole lot coming off of him because he's just in a military uniform, which literally is designed to like strip you of your individual identity and turn you into just like one of thousands. But yeah, I agree. I don't really have another one.
Hiroo Onoda looks like a radical Japanese soldier with imperialist tendencies who believes that Hirohito was a god on Earth.
In December of 1944, he was stationed in Lubang, a small strategic island in the Philippines. His orders were to push back against an oncoming American attack by sabotaging all harbor installations. He also had orders to take down any enemy ships or planes that came into sight. He was also given the order to never surrender and to never take his own life. He was to stay there until his mission was done. With this command, Hiroo received from Major Yoshimi Taniguchi.
It may take 3 years, it may take 5, but whatever happens, we'll come back for you.
Keep fighting. We'll come back for you. No matter what. Even if somebody is literally like, hey, the war ended years ago. It's all over with. Don't believe them. At first, Hiroo was unable to carry out his mission. Other Japanese units were there, and many other soldiers outranked him, preventing him from conducting guerrilla warfare. He was like a fresh college graduate hired at a company for one position, but soon found himself needing to do other things that weren't part of the job description. The officers there before him were more concerned with evacuating Japanese residents on the island. This general disinterest in targeting enemy vessels may have made it easier for the Philippine Commonwealth as well as the U.S. Army to take back the island when the latter got there on February 28, 1945. Most remaining Japanese on Lubang either fled or were killed to the point where the only ones left on the island were Hiroo and 3 other soldiers: Private Yuichi Akatsu, Private First Class Kinishichi Kozuka, and Corporal Shoichi Shimada. Perhaps remembering the words he received from Major Taniguchi, Onoda took charge and led the other 3 men into the Lubang Mountains. Hiroo was finally about to take charge and engage in the guerrilla warfare tactics he had been sent to Lubang to conduct. So the team just stayed in the mountains. They constructed bamboo huts and ate rice, coconuts, and bananas they could steal from nearby villages, even killing cows for the meat. During this time, they even patched up their uniforms and maintained their rifles all on their own. And all this work and effort was all ultimately for naught. World War II ended in September of 1945, and in October, Hiroo's group found its first leaflet saying how Japan had surrendered. They found more leaflets later that year that were dropped by air in an attempt to get any more holdouts to return to Japan. Hiroo and his comrades studied the leaflet and believed it to be false, with Hiroo later claiming in an interview,
"The leaflets they dropped were filled with mistakes, so I judged it was a plot by the Americans."
So we're just getting into this, and honestly, this episode was probably based on this because it's like so similar. But there's an episode of Voyager where they find this sentient bomb. It's like a distress signal, and they think it's just a hologram. And the Doctor like takes sympathy on it because his whole character arc is, attaining his own sentience and then like becoming this great empathizer with other like artificial life forms. And then they find out it's a weapon. And then basically the bomb has these orders to destroy this planet, and it hijacks one of the Voyager's away mission vessels, and it's going to go and it's going to destroy this planet. They're trying to stop it. And then they discover that the orders to destroy this planet were from some war that happened like decades ago that's over. And they tried to send a transmission canceling the order, but it never received the transmission. And so they show it the transmission and the bomb doesn't believe it. And they basically have to like convince it that the transmission is real so that it won't blow up this planet. And kind of the moral of the story, or the thing that they're getting at, is that this bomb, its entire identity was built around violence, and its entire life's mission became destroying this planet. And whenever it was confronted with the idea that its entire existence that it had like invested in basically for this bomb's entire life was just over and done with, it was pointless, it refuses to accept it. And then it is willfully pretending like it doesn't think that the transmission is real. And it realizes it is, but it just doesn't want to accept it because it would have to accept that like its whole existence is pointless. First of all, before I say what I was just going to say, what is your experience with this story? Like, did you know about this story? When did you hear about it? And what are your sort of like general thoughts about this story if you are sort of aware of it?
I'm dimly aware of it. I heard about it a few years ago. I think maybe from you, but maybe just when we worked in the office together talking about strange historical stories for a digital media vertical that we were both working on at the time.
You can say Pornhub.
Yeah, from when we were both working at Pornhub. And we were debating making a Hiroo Onoda porn parody. Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah. And initially you were like, Dave, you should play him in the porn parody. And I was like, I don't know. And you're like, no, it'll be great. I can totally see you as a bloodthirsty, vengeance-filled Japanese soldier. And I was like, I don't want any piece of this.
I wanted you to go full Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's.
I was like, I don't want to do this. And then you were like, no, I think it's going to be great. And then you kept bringing articles of clothing, like period accurate Japanese soldier World War II uniform components into work. Like it started out with just like little like pipettes, and you were like, just put them on your jacket. They're really cool. And then like you brought in like a Japanese flag, and then you brought in like an overcoat that was like a period overcoat. You're like, I just found it at a local fucking antique shop, man. I think it'll look great on you. It's just your size. And I was like, I don't know about this. And then it really hit a wall when you started bringing in swords and like World War II era guns. I was like, I don't feel comfortable with this.
Yeah, I was like yellowface cucking you.
Right.
Well, so anyway, besides that real thing that all actually happened, continue.
I've known of the story, none of the ins and outs of the details or anything, but I'm just aware that there's this kind of quirky story from history, which is really sad, about a guy who never realized that World War II was over and spent fucking 30 years of his life fighting a war that had been ended.
I think that's about what like most people who know the story, that's kind of their understanding of it. And I just didn't know how in-depth you were aware of the story or not. I wasn't necessarily either. I've definitely read about it, but I definitely like wasn't an expert on it or anything like that. But I do think that it is one of these stories that we've covered frequently, like David Hahn, where there is the bite-sized clickbait viral version of the story, which is a lot more cut and dry, and it's a lot more kind of like editorialized to have a very specific like hook to it that kind of like astroturfs the real story and like kind of the nuances of it. And, if David Hahn, that version of the story is like a teenage boy built a nuclear reactor in his backyard because he was like a genius ahead of his time or whatever, which is like, number one, not accurate because he didn't actually build a nuclear reactor. He just built a thing that was supposed to be a nuclear reactor, and it did emit radiation, but it wasn't a real nuclear reactor. And also it just kind of like glosses over just like the real story, which was this like terminally neglected child who experienced one of the bleakest childhoods of all time. In this case, I think that the viral clickbait version of the story that many people have seen on the internet is like, it's based around the hook of a Japanese soldier because he was like lost in the woods. He just never got told that World War II ended, and he continued on for 30 years thinking that the war was still going. And while that is basically true, as we're going to get into and as we're going to talk about, I think that the real kind of like under the ocean iceberg of this story is that it's not just strictly that he was like in this very like clickbaity way that the story is presented of like, he just was like in the woods and didn't know and he just kept going on. I think that the reality of the situation is that there's that element, but there's also the element of like, as we've covered so far in the story, he was somebody who was like, became deeply invested in the idea of being a weapon of the military. And it was like seeing combat and fulfilling that duty became his identity. And then he didn't quite get to do that. And whenever he was confronted with the fact that he missed his opportunity and the war was over, he just kind of rejected it and was like, no, it's not.
That is so bleak and so sad and just like drives to the core of why military indoctrination is so depressing. And also I can't focus on any of it because the shirt that you're wearing is a Venom t-shirt, but the graphic design of it is driving me crazy because the back component of the V and the back component of the N look like they're small little like French accents over the E and the O. So it looks like it's Venom, not Venom. And everything you were saying was so poignant and, you know, insightful about the human condition, and none of it has landed for me because all I can hear in my head is Venom, Venom.
I mean, that's what it is.
So distracting to me. I've bought posters or, you know, dumb shit to have around my house, and then there's like small flaws in it that I didn't see. Like I have a Johnny Quest poster on this wall over here, and there's like 75 tangents in it that I didn't see before I bought it and aren't purposeful. And every time I look at it, I'm like, Johnny's head is touching the top of that fucking shelf. Johnny's head is touching, and Johnny's pants are the wrong color. Why are Johnny's pants orange? Johnny's pants should be blue. What the fuck is this? I hate this.
So Hiroo continued what he perceived to be his mission, but that came at the expense of Filipino lives. An exact number is difficult to pin down, but it's estimated that Hiroo is responsible for the deaths of up to 30 people he got into skirmishes with in Lubang, believing them to be enemy forces. Hiroo and the three others were what's known as Japanese holdouts. After World War II ended, many Japanese soldiers continued fighting either because they questioned Japan's surrender, didn't know about the surrender due to a lack of communications, or figured they would be killed if they surrendered to the Allied forces. For Hiroo, his motivation and the story typically associated with him is generally one of stout honor and devotion to the Japanese Imperial Army. But gradually, Hiroo started losing the only men by his side. Yuichi Akatsu was the first to go. He separated from the group in September of 1949, and after hiding out by himself for 6 months, he surrendered to Philippine forces in the village of Lok. By February of 1952, more letters and photographs were airdropped over Lubang from families of Hiroo and the other two men. Once again, they thought it was a trick, and they continued their mission. On May 7, 1954, a Philippine Army mountain unit discovered the three soldiers. Hiroo and Kinshichi were able to get into offensive positions fast enough, but Soichi stayed in his position and was killed instantly in the gunfire. This sounds like a fucking Twilight Zone episode.
Like literally the Twilight Zone episode with Leonard Nimoy.
Yeah, but like there's a Twilight Zone episode that was based on this, but it sounds like a Twilight Zone episode, independent of the fact that there was one that was based on it. Once again, I think it's motivated by what I was talking about before, where he just didn't want to accept that he had not been able to fulfill his purpose in the way that he had dedicated his life to. But there's that genuine, very Twilight Zone-esque psychological aspect to it where I really could see somebody who's been so radicalized by the idea that, number one, that there's these like ultimate enemies in the world and that you have to do everything up to and including killing yourself to protect your empire from, and then seeing like literal letters from like your family, like your wife or your parents being like, please come home, and just in this state of paranoia being like, it's a trick, like they're trying to lure me out so they can kill me.
It's that Lost in a Hall of Mirrors concept that we talked about in that episode about spycraft, where like you become trapped in a prison of your own mind where you think everyone is out to get you, and the paranoia becomes the only thing that is safe feeling. Like the only level of safety you can actually inhabit is a complete lack of safety.
Yeah, which is like, I think probably something that the human mind has a predisposition towards. Because the thing I think a lot is whenever you sort of talk to people who have this very like conspiracy theory, conspiracism minded way of thinking about the world where, you know, I have this conspiracy theory about this, and you're like, oh, well, but there's this proof or these facts that say that that's not true. And it's like, yeah, but like, that's just lies that the media tells you, or that's just made up or something like that. Sometimes you have these conversations with people like that, and like, no matter what you say, it's a lie. It's like propaganda. And it's like, while there definitely are lies that are being told to us by, you know, various groups of people, and while there definitely exists propaganda in the world that we are actively and even not consciously exposed to, and I'm sure that there are things that all of us believe that are actually based on some deception or propaganda, the idea that like the answer to everything that contradicts your own worldview is that it's a lie or a deception, at that point it's like, well, then nothing is true. Like, you've built a house of cards for yourself where you can't believe literally anything. So you can't even have your own principles and your own beliefs, because in the world that you've created, there's literally no piece of information that you could ever trust. So you have to just live in this chaotic world where you don't trust anything, and everybody's out to get you, and everything is lies. Number one, that's just called mental illness. And number two, that's just a horrible existence.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for the ability to attempt to bifurcate those areas in your mind, you know? And there's also something to be said for being a privileged person and having other alternatives than going into the military. The place I'm from, a lot of my friends went into the military because they didn't have any other options. It was their way out, right? And some of them were able to grab that opportunity and make something of it, go to school on the GI Bill, really get out and make something of themselves. Most of the people I know that went into the military, they did their 4, 8, whatever years. They got out and they went back to our shitty little town and did exactly the same shit they were doing before, because that's where their comfort was. But now they have this like oppressive fear of all of these other things that they've witnessed, and post-traumatic stress and all of these horrible byproducts. And so in a situation like this, where it's like, it's that cranked up to like 3,000, I can't even imagine. Like, I can't even imagine what it must be like to not trust the physical world around you. You know?
Yeah.
Because the literal jungle you're in is trying to eat you, but also metaphorically, the life raft that is being thrown at you, these pamphlets saying it's all okay, come home, you think are also trying to kill you, which is so crazy.
Yeah, and which, to the point of bringing up the conspiracy theory thing, whenever you get to that level psychologically, that is the absolute distrust of everything around you. All input is the only way that you can interface with your life and existence. At that point, it's all you can do. So it's understandable to a certain extent that he would see like letters from his family and say it's a lie by the Allied forces and they're just trying to lure me out to kill me or whatever. Because at that point, whenever you're in that state of mind, that's the only logical conclusion you could draw.
Yeah, what other option makes sense, right?
Yeah. Hiroo and Kensichi retreated, but news of Shoichi's death reached the Japanese government, and seeing that Shoichi was out there meant that there was a chance the other two could be as well. Japan coordinated with the Philippine government to pursue a rescue operation to get them out of there, continuing to drop leaflets and put out messages. Hiroo even received a leaflet from his mother and sister, but refused to believe they had written them of their own free will, believing they were being held at gunpoint to try to draw him out. His mother also taught him from a young age never to surrender.
It's so interesting because, you know, I'm trying to put myself in his shoes, and like, there's a specific phrase that if one of my family members said to me, I would know that's like our specific passcode of like saying something's not right, or, you know, this is true or whatever. But in this context of like, it's coming from the government. So is the government holding them hostage and has broken them and is making them say this? It's so weird.
Yeah. If we were ever in a situation like this and I sent you a letter and you weren't sure whether it was actually me or not, or it was genuine, or if, you know, somebody was trying to lure you out, you would know that whatever I wrote, if I signed it at the end, P.S., this is definitely a date, you would know that it's real.
The real answer is if you had said something about how every movie we see is bad. That's how I would know.
Yeah. Number one, to your point, like all you would have to do is just establish a piece of information that like is so obscure that nobody could possibly even think to try to interrogate it out of you.
Yeah, but see, the thing is, now that we're like 200 episodes deep in this, all of our inside jokes are things from the show.
Oh, no, there's one.
There is? There's one in particular that's not from the show?
The biggest and best one.
Oh! Oh, yeah! That is how you know. That is how you know. If you drop that in a suicide note or a come home little Davy from the fucking Philippine jungle, I would know that it's real.
So, it's possible. But also, in all seriousness, it's kind of one of those, like, when somebody tells you who they are, believe them type things, where it's like, you're sitting there begging him to come home, and please come home, and it's like, yeah, but, like, you literally, personally contributed to this lifelong indoctrination into this idea of never surrendering, never trusting anybody, putting, the benefit of the empire above the personal. Like, you personally instilled this in him. So, like, what do you expect to happen when you're like, hey, come home, please?
Yeah, but there's a difference between, like, culturally never surrendering and, like, aspiring to that ideal and then literally not surrendering when it's 15 or 20 years after the war is ended.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's definitely a confluence of things going on. And one of those things is definitely, like, spiraling into psychosis. But his mom just wanted him back home at this point. She pleaded with the Japanese government to begin another search and rescue operation, which they eventually granted. They spread leaflets and magazines to get their attention. They even played the voices of their family members over loudspeakers, but in order to stay vigilant and hear any potential oncoming attacks, Hiroo and Kensichi just moved away from the loudspeakers anytime they began blaring. The search and rescue began in May of 1959 and ended in November. Without Hiroo emerging, the group carved Hiroo and Kensichi's name on a tree and returned home. The Japanese government officially declared them dead after their return, even though they were still out there and causing havoc for the small island. As this is going on, relations between Japan and the Philippines start to improve, with the government wanting to lay to rest the idea there were Japanese soldiers terrorizing a small island for fear it would make it seem like the two countries were still at war. But the people of Lubang couldn't put it behind them. Listen, guys, we're all cool here. Everything's cool. We're buddies. We're Budinskis. We're Abraham Lincolns. Forget about the island of murderous spies that attack you every time you go near them. Just put that out of your mind. That's nothing. That's not a big deal. That's just like, every relationship has its like rocky parts. Like sometimes, you're living with somebody and, they pile too many dishes in the sink and it makes it hard for you to do it. Sometimes, you just don't like the way that, they leave the toilet seat up. And, in this particular case, we have a sleeper cell island of people who keep trying to murder you. We just got to work around it,
And honestly, like, is that even really that big a deal? It's not like they're active sleeper cells. They're sleeper cells. They're sleeping. They're really little nap boys is really more what it's like.
Yeah, we got some little nap boys. And if you walk over near them, they don't wake daddy up and stab you. But like, come on.
Yeah, this is exactly what I'm saying. So like, maybe just come on home,
On October 19th, 1972, Kensichi was killed in a shootout with the Philippines police, with Hiroo suffering injuries and fleeing back into the forest. With news of Kensichi's death reaching the Japanese government, they once more had to consider that Hiroo Onoda was still out there, so yet another search party began. Man, and like, how fucking pointless. I mean, you could argue that all the deaths that were resultant from World War II were pointless, although there's just much more of an argument of like, actively fighting to eradicate fascism from the global West. But these, it's just like pointless deaths. You guys are just hiding out in the woods. There's literally no conflict. These two countries are like actively mending their relationship, and you just died for nothing.
Yeah, really, you're not so much soldiers anymore as just murderers?
Yeah. Both Japanese and Filipino soldiers embarked on the search, with everyone pretty much just wanting to get this guy out of there and get the last World War II soldier home. Hiroo's family once again went to the Philippines, but his mother stayed behind due to illness. But by this point, Hiroo was so familiar with the jungle that he could evade any dogs or soldiers looking for him, and he remained elusive. The search party was called off, with Hiroo once again being declared dead. Through all the searches and leaflets, it was a random college dropout who finally found Hiroo. Norio Suzuki was traveling the world, even telling his friends that he was looking for
Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman.
In that order. I love that. He was like, he went on a journey to find a rare animal, a missing soldier, and a cryptid. That's a hell of a bucket list. Norio stumbled upon him after 4 days in Lubang. The two actually became friends, with Hiroo later describing Norio as a hippie boy, but Hiroo was adamant he couldn't leave until he had official orders from his commanding officer to do so. And then here we have a picture of our boy Hiroo Onoda standing next to Norio Suzuki. You want to describe this, Dave?
Norio Suzuki looks like your favorite late afternoon talk show host, like Wendy Williams or Montel or one of those people.
That's exactly what it looks like. And Hiroo Onoda is significantly older looking than he was whenever World War II was going on. So he's just been out in the woods, just aging.
But hear me out, right? This motherfucker, more so than aging, this motherfucker's got to smell awful.
Oh, yeah.
He has not had deodorant in 30 years. Or he's been sneaking into town and, like, robbing the local Filipino Rite Aid at night and then, like, disappearing back into the fucking forest. And he's, like, leaving with, like, you know, jars full of Q-tips and, like, deodorant and shampoo. And people are like, bro, World War II's ended. And he's like, I can't hear you.
He's shopping in the store and people were just like, things are cool. Like, nothing's going on right now. We have, like, a couple decades of prosperity and peace before the Vietnam War happens. And he's just like, blah, 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 blah. Can't hear you. Just getting Q-tips.
They're like, dude, it's 1970. Bell bottoms are in. And he's like,
You missed the Beatles.
He's like, I can't hear you, but I do want to hold your hand. As he, like, disappears into the trees.
You son of a bitch. You're just hanging out in there fucking listening to records and shit, aren't you? You don't even care about World War II. You're just, like, hanging out.
He's like, y'all seen that Gilligan's Island? That shit's hilarious.
You go into his little hovel and he's built like a Flintstone style like TV and record player that are like made out of stone, and he like controls them by conveyor belts, and he just has this little like weird like forest mansion that's all just like cobbled together in contraptions.
You're just describing a hobbit hole.
Yeah. Norio took photographs of Hiroo back to Japan. So one last time, they brought a delegation along with Hiroo's brother Toshiro and Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, who was a bookseller at that point. The fucking war is over. Like, I'm fucking selling self-help bullshit over here now. I'm hawking chicken soup for the teenage soul.
He comes out of the fucking forest holding a gun, and he's like pointing it at a Filipino soldier, and he's like, "Are you there, Margaret? It's me, God."
he has all the books.
Yeah. Oh no, it needs to be the other way around. No, he comes out of the forest and he's like, "Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret."
You gotta just think about it from the perspective of like the Japanese government, where they're just like, in reality, you would expect that this guy would have fucking died 1,000,000 times over for years. And so every time he pops up, and obviously the Japanese government is trying to pass the buck on this. They don't want to be involved with this, which isn't good. Like, they should try harder because it's literally their fault that this dude is fucking crazy in the woods. But they don't want anything to do with it. They just want to move on. And can you imagine every single time? Because like they go look for him and they can't find him, and then they're just like, he's fucking dead, he's fucking dead. And then another picture of him surfaces, or another story of him like fucking murdering somebody pops up, and they're just like, this fucking guy. Like, what the fuck? How is this possible? God damn it. All right, send another search party, for fuck's sake. What is happening?
This fucking guy. 14 years we've been searching for this guy. He's still fucking out here. What is he gonna? He's not gonna live much longer. It's not like we're gonna have to do this again for another 15 years.
This is a single guy living in a forest on an island. He's gonna die in like 5 weeks.
What is this guy living on? What is he eating?
I don't fucking know, man. I don't fucking know. He's like, oh yeah, I just fucking Uber Eats shit.
He's like, surge pricing is my pain and butter.
I send a Jaguar into town and he like picks up my to-go orders. 29 years after the war ended, Taniguchi finally relieved Hiroo of his duty, and they all returned to Japan. Upon seeing his brother face to face once more, Hiroo told him,
I am sorry I have disturbed you for so long a time.
Which feels like weirdly underwhelming. Like there was a train in Japan, in Tokyo, that left 15 seconds late, and the company that runs the subway system released a public statement apologizing to the Japanese public about this like gross inconvenience. And there was like a video where they're like bowing and like begging people for their forgiveness because a train left 15 seconds late. And that kind of feels like, I mean, I don't actually know how accurate this is because I'm not integrated into Japanese culture in a real way other than fucking reading Shonen Jump and eating ramen in the morning. So I don't know if this is actually true, but it seems at least the way it's portrayed a lot is that that's kind of how Japanese people are, is that they're just like very committed to not committing social faux pas to the point where like they will go so out of their way to be apologetic for minor inconveniences that they like enact on other people. So that being said, that feels so actually underwhelming of like, he comes out of the woods after 30 years. He's killed multiple innocent people. And he's just like, sorry, bro. My bad.
My bad, broski.
Did I do that? He's like, wait a minute. You watch Family Matters? No, I have a monkey and a bear reenact episode of Family Matters in a giant stone television that I built. Dave Baker. How you feeling so far about the ballad of Hiroo Onoda?
Feeling good. Feeling great. Feeling like I kind of want to go get lost in the jungle for 30 years.
Speaking of getting lost in the jungle for 30 years and losing your sanity, do you have any sort of like philosophical labyrinths of the mind to get lost in that you want to talk about?
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, so my personal labyrinth, which took me 5 years to make, is the hybrid novel, graphic novel, Mary Tyler Moorhawk, available now wherever you get your books. You can buy it on my website, heydavebaker.com, or you can go to Amazon or your local bookstore, or any and all of the above. Spandrew, where can people find something that you made on the internet?
I've never made anything in my entire life. I have no hobbies. I'm devoid of any shred of creativity. But if you want to pick up our dear beloved Papa Pricey's book, Deadbolt AI Private Eye, which is a comic about a future robot detective solving crimes in a sci-fi Blade Runner-esque landscape, you can go to dapricerights.com. You can also follow us on social media by going to Facebook and searching Deep Cuts Podcast. You can join our Facebook group by searching the Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group. We talk about the show there. We make memes. We joke around. We pal around. We do a lot of stuff around there. You can also join their Discord server by going to bit.ly.com/deepcutsdiscord. We also sort of interact in a sort of circular way there, palling around, joking around, joshing around. We do a little bit of joshing there. Less joshing on the Facebook group, but there's definitely some joshing in the Discord server. But we also make memes. We also play games. We also give dating advice. A little bit of that getting thrown out here and there. There was one time when I thought two listeners in the Discord were like, they were kind of getting flirty. That didn't seem to go anywhere. But for a little bit, it was like, oh, maybe someone's going to find love in the Discord. Some love in this club. But the club is the Deep Cuts Discord. But who knows? Maybe it'll be you. Maybe you'll be the first one. You can follow us on TikTok at Mystery Treehouse. You can follow us on Instagram at Deep Cuts Pod. And you can follow me on TikTok at Dead Boy Detective. I make videos about like fact stuff, trivia. I would solidly say that my channel is like a yap channel. I'm just yapping. And sometimes I get like 4 million views on me just like talking for 3 minutes. So go check that out. Act 2, An Anti-Hero's Welcome. Before Hiroo Onoda returned to Japan, there was still the matter of the 30 Lubang residents he and his men reportedly killed. Seeing as Hiroo believed he was still under command to carry out his mission and to bolster relations between Japan and the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos, the national prime minister of the Philippines at the time, decided to grant Hiroo amnesty, forgiving him of his myriad crimes over the past 30 years. Hiroo arrived back in Japan as a hero. So here's some footage of him arriving back in Japan off of the plane.
That's an old ass plane, dude.
This is 1974. March 13th, 1974. He's just getting off the plane and kind of standing at the top of it, and he's giving a wave to everybody. He looks like he's like filled with pride and emotion. Everybody, he's getting a hero's welcome. Honestly, it's a little bit more than I would expect for somebody who just spent the last 30 years crazy in the woods.
Yeah, this is much more. You would expect him to get the grizzly man treatment, which is Werner Herzog makes a documentary about you and a bunch of people make fun of you.
Yep.
Oh, there he is, our guy, late afternoon talk show host.
Yeah, the treatment where what you experienced was actually just incredibly bleak and sad, but everybody's like, yeah, but you kind of brought it on yourself, though. You're a fucking idiot.
And those are his parents, and they're very glad to see him crying. They're very relieved he's home safe, which is very sweet.
I mean, honestly, like, talk about getting off scot-free.
Yeah, for real.
Imagine doing something that crazy. It's like that Homelander meme, you know, the one where he, like, killed some random guy in public, and he, like, stops for a second, and he's surrounded by a crowd, and then they all start applauding him, and then he's looking around with that face of, like, they love it! And then that became a meme.
Mm-hmm.
It's that. It's literally that.
Yeah, man, I don't know. Part of me wants to be like, hey, at least he's home safe. You know, at least that's good. Another part of me is like, yeah, but he was just out here like murking dudes.
If it was just that he was like in the woods thinking that World War II was still happening, I would have like a lot more sympathy, but he murdered 30 people. He's a serial killer.
He's a fucking serial killer.
And you know, going back to what I was saying in the beginning of the episode, there's also this blurred line of like how much of it was that he genuinely just thought that World War II was still happening, and how much of it was like he just wanted it to still be happening and just refused to accept that it wasn't.
Yeah.
And under that context, those actions are not a soldier thinking that he's fulfilling his duties. Those are like a person who just has a bloodlust and is killing people despite the fact that he intellectually knows that he's not supposed to be doing that, which is called murder.
I mean, I think like it's pretty apparent which side of that aisle he chose to place his seat.
Yeah. After a checkup at the hospital, he became a massive public figure, albeit one who was essentially a man at a time. By 1974, he was over 50 years old and only knew a life of constant vigilance and being ready to fight for the death at any moment. How often is there a celebrity walking around the streets of Japan who's a murderer? Is that just like a quota that they have to fit?
No way, dude. Like, Japan's one of the safest places on earth. Like, when there is somebody murdered, it's like a national story.
Yes, Japan is one of the safest places on earth. But this is the second example we have covered on this show of the fact that there's a celebrity living amongst the population of Japan who was a murderer.
Yeah, but we have like just working actors in the US who are murderers.
But celebrity because they were murderers.
So do we, though. Zodiac Killer, Son of Sam, fucking Charlie Manson.
Charles Manson isn't just like living in Los Feliz.
That's true. He's not. He's in prison. Yeah.
Los Feliz, sorry.
Yeah, that's true.
But his relentless spirit was praised. A local editorial called Onoda Spirit was published, exalting all Hiroo had done.
Onoda's unyielding and resolute attitude may be beyond the comprehension of the present-day generation, so used to living in material affluence. To this soldier, duty took precedence over personal sentiments.
My God, when the essay word count has to be met. Like, that's some spin on what he did. The editorial concluded,
Onoda has shown us that there is much more to life than just material affluence and selfish pursuits. There is a spiritual aspect, something that we may have forgotten.
This may be the reason Hiroo was such an enticing public figure. He represented an old-school way of thinking in Japan, honoring duty and dedication above all else. The country hadn't been at war since the 1940s, but he still exemplified a willingness to lay down one's life for what's perceived as the greater good. And it's believed that Hiroo didn't like what Japan had become in his absence. With the help of a ghostwriter, he published a book about his time in Lubang called No Surrender, My 30-Year War. It became a bestseller, but Hiroo needed another purpose in life beyond war. Hiroo, tired of the attention he received in Japan, decided to follow the lead of his brother, Tadao, and moved to Brazil. Over 30,000 Japanese moved to Brazil following World War II for employment opportunities, and Hiroo followed suit at the cost of leaving his mother and father once more. As he told them about his plan, his mother told him,
It was a desire to see my son's face forever. But you had the hardest life for a long time, so I'm letting you go. I am too old to see you in this world again, but I believe I can see you in the world after.
I mean, these people are just bending over backwards to like rationalize and justify the things that this guy did.
Totally.
In contrast, Hiroo's father didn't hesitate to encourage him to go to Brazil. He's like, get the fuck out of here. You're fucking crazy, man. So Hiroo became a cattle farmer and got married to Machi Honoku in 1976. It almost seems picturesque. A man lost to time, finding meaning by moving across the globe and finding family and purpose elsewhere. You said this before, you said something about this before, but we just gotta stop and go back and reflect. Now that we finally got to the part where he left and he went back to Japan and he started in 1942 and he came home in 1974. And we gotta go back and reflect. What the fuck was he doing in the woods for 30 years? All jokes aside of him building like Flintstone TVs or whatever, what the fuck was he doing out there?
You think he was like,
jerking off? I probably.
Yeah, dude. You think he was just like hanging out with bears and shit? Like with,
Yeah, I think he probably did fuck a few bears.
He was just like coaxing those panthers or whatever the fuck else are in the jungles. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't even mean that. Like, you can fuck bears or whatever floats his boat or whatever. But I just mean on a practical level, what the fuck was he doing in the woods for 30 years? What was the food that he ate? Where did he sleep? That's not just like I'm roughing it in the woods for a couple weeks or even like 5 months or even like a year. That's like I have transitioned to woodland living.
Do you think that the whole time he was just like, tomorrow, I'm going to start my novel? For 30 years. That's what he was doing.
He did like everything but that. He's just like, I've got to start my novel. And then he's like, I rearranged the rocks in the woods again.
Yeah.
You know what they say? If you ever want to get something done, you just got to start a creative project and then you'll do every other thing. However, in 1984, he began splitting his time between Brazil and Japan. He had read a story about a student in preparatory school who murdered his parents with a baseball bat. Such a thing never happened in his day, so believing that the youth of Japan were losing their way, he established the Onoda Nature School. The goal of the camp was to interact with nature and get real-world skills, like making fire and foraging for food. As for Norio Suzuki, the man who found Hiroo, his life came to an end in 1987 while mountaineering and getting caught up in an avalanche. According to reports, he was still trying to fulfill his goal of meeting a Yeti after rescuing Hiroo Onoda. I know that that's like not actually funny. Like he died in kind of like a tragic accident, but like he died trying to find a Bigfoot.
Yep. I love it. No, but you know what though? That's like, it's entrepreneurial bias. Is that what it's called? Where it's like, a startup company founder like thinks they can do anything because they've successfully done something once. That's him. He's like, I'm gonna go find this fucking jackhole that's totally dead out in the fucking, oh my god, it's him. Maybe the Yeti does exist.
Yeah, because entrepreneurial bias is like, they drop out of college and they start a company, and like everybody is telling them along the way that they're making a bad choice and they're gonna fail. And then when they're successful, they're like, I'm God. It's like exactly that. Because it's like, yeah, you're right. Like his goals were finding a cryptid and then a thing that was like kind of at the same level of impossibility. That would be like if you were like, I'm gonna go to Russia and like free Brittany Griner from prison when she was in prison over there. You're not gonna do that. That's not gonna happen. You're not accomplishing that. And then he like literally did. He was like, oh fuck.
Here's the twist though. What if I did?
That was you?
I mean, I can't confirm or deny, but what if I did?
I mean, you were like gone for like 2 weeks right before she came back. And you were like, weren't responding to texts and...
I can't confirm or deny anything, but all I'll say is...
Wait a minute, doesn't that mean I'm not going to do that?
Oh shit, I mean...
Yeah, you think I'm going to say no to rescuing Brittany Griner from Russian prison?
It's my duty.
To pay honor to his friend and the man that gave him a new lease on life, Hiroo traveled to the mountain and made an altar in his memory. Amidst all this, there was one lingering problem. The fact that he still fucking murdered a bunch of Lubang residents and their families weren't happy. While Japanese media praised Hiroo, Filipino media focused more on the families who lost loved ones during Hiroo's occupation of Lubang. Reports suggest Hiroo and his fellow soldiers killed up to 30 people. In 1996, Hiroo visited the town of Lok after his wife arranged a $10,000 USD scholarship fund to go towards a local school. But his reception in Lubang was mixed to say the least. Some didn't seem to mind Hiroo Onoda's presence. The AP News quoted a junior high school teacher, Amy Villar.
Some people said he killed many people, but it's already a thing of the past. He's part of our history.
More than 50 relatives of those Hiroo allegedly killed protested his visit. Wilfredo Bleza, a spokesman for this group, said,
"We do not welcome Onoda until he compensates all his victims. We are asking for justice."
But while Hiroo established the scholarship, he didn't really see a point in doing anything beyond that. He was quoted as saying,
"In any country, soldiers operate under orders. As long as they follow orders and don't violate international law, they have no responsibility."
This is like a crazier version of the fact that like Jordan Belfort, like he got out of prison and then he just like became like a TikTok influencer. And it's like, fuck you, dude. You like swindled innocent people out of their fucking life savings. And you're just gonna fucking come out here and be like, I'm giving my top 10 financial advice on TikTok. Like, go fuck yourself.
Yep. And also to see him like embraced by those grind set dudes and just being like, Jordan, he's the fucking Wolf of Wall Street. And it's like, did you not learn the lesson of that?
Yeah. And this is like that times 10, because it's like, all hail this hero who murdered 30 innocent people for no reason? What the fuck are you talking about? Hiroo Onoda died on January 16th, 2014 due to heart failure and pneumonia. At the time of his death, Hiroo was still something of a mythical figure in Japan. Upon news of his death, Japan's government spokesman Yoshide Shuja said of Hiroo,
"I vividly remember that I was reassured of the end of the war when Mr. Onoda returned to Japan."
But Hiroo's legacy and determination to fulfill his duty remains a complex one. In the time since his death, a feature-length film called Onoda, 10,000 Nights in the Jungle came out in 2021 from Arthur Harari. Werner Herzog even wrote a novel about him called The Twilight World in 2022. Both of these works gloss over the dozens Hiroo and his fellow soldiers reportedly killed. And pretty much since Hiroo got out of the Philippines, there have been those trying to dismantle the mythology surrounding him. That's an interesting point because, number one, I can totally see how a figure like Werner Herzog could be so much more fascinated by the elements of the story of a man like trapped in a labyrinth of paranoia and continuing on a war that's ended in reality in his mind for 30 years. I can totally understand and relate to the fact that he would be so much more fascinated by that he would lose sight and not really like anchor it to the fact that he also did these really terrible things and kind of gloss over them. And it's interesting because I think that we could easily do that in this show with some of the people that we've talked about. I don't know about you, but I'm assuming that you feel a similar way or you've done a similar thing, but I sort of go out of my way to also make sure to include the discussions about that in these episodes. Because I could also very easily focus more on the sort of philosophical aspects of these things and kind of gloss over the nuts and bolts problematic aspects of somebody's life where they've directly harmed people. But I've sort of made a conscious effort to make sure to try to illuminate the entire life of the person as best as I can.
Nah. Just nah. No, of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Notably, Suda Shin, the ghostwriter for Hiroo Onoda's memoir, basically published a full-on retraction a couple of years after that book initially came out. The book was called Imaginary Hero: 3 Months with Officer Onoda, where Shin essentially asserts that not only did Hiroo know that the war was over, but that he killed so many Lubang residents because he enjoyed it. Shin also claims that the number of people Hiroo is responsible for killing varied greatly during their talks. Sometimes it was as many as 130, whereas other times he said it was closer to 30. It's worth noting that in the film Onoda 10,000 Nights in the Jungle, Hiroo was only shown killing 2 people, and in both instances, they're in self-defense. As we were talking about before, as we've touched on a couple of times, number one, I definitely think there's more of that than the mythology lets on. I definitely think that there's more of he kind of knew the war was over and he was just doing this because he was programmed to want to fulfill some kind of duty, and these people that he murdered were like sacrificial lambs, where he was out there just like kayfabing war, and these people just, he dehumanized them to serve as the casualties of this war simulation he was playing out in his mind. I definitely think there's more of it in what really happened than the mythology lets on. And I also could see a scenario where it was all that, and he literally was just fully aware that the war was over, and he was just murdering people because he was fucking crazy and psychotic, and just like playing out a war scenario in his mind that he was well aware was not necessary. I'm not saying it was definitely that, but I could totally see that it could be.
Yeah. Also, the fact that so many of these people kind of like enter into his orbit with the idea of like this Japanese sense of honor and this greater purpose and like him as a symbol. And then once they kind of become a part of the gravitational pull of him as an individual, they all have some version of, yeah, I don't know, man, this guy's off a bit.
Yeah, it's like everybody who actually gets into your like personal sphere of familiarity ends up having kind of like a weird like red flag reaction.
Yeah.
But some are trying to change Hiroo Onoda's perception. Filmmaker Mia Stewart had a great uncle killed by Hiroo. She spoke in an interview about hearing of Hiroo Onoda.
When I first heard about my great uncle's death from my mother, I was shocked and angry because he was just an innocent person who was working on a farm. He was unarmed and basically killed in cold blood.
Stewart has pursued her own film, Searching for Onoda, that attempts to recenter the story back onto the Philippine residents who lost loved ones. Hiroo Onoda was many things to many people. To the Japanese, upon his return, he exemplified sensibilities that were lost on newer generations. Werner Herzog's novel describes him as a Robinson Crusoe-like character caught in an absurdist mission. But for many, like Mia Stewart's family, he was effectively a boogeyman. Someone hiding out in the jungle who stole food and supplies from farmers and regularly engaged in shootouts, killing who knows how many people. And as Stewart was making her documentary, she had actually intended to visit Hiroo Onoda and speak with him, but he died just days before the interview. Instead, Stewart went to his memorial at Yasukuni Shrine. His wife wasn't in any mental state to speak with her, and others there who knew Hiroo spoke highly of him. For a Japanese government looking to boost national pride, exalting Hiroo Onoda was a natural step. After all, he wasn't even the last Japanese holdout, as that honor technically belongs to Teruo Nakamura, who was found on June 15, 1979, just a few months after Hiroo. However, Nakamura was a private, a lower rank than Hiroo. He also had Taiwanese ancestry, so he didn't receive the same hero's welcome in Japan. And he was viewed as a Japanese loyalist in Taiwan, so he was truly a man without a home and ended up dying of lung cancer just 5 years later. Hiroo Onoda was the story the Japanese government went with, regardless of how many he killed and injured. And if there's anything to take from this story, it's to always check your spelling if you're planning on dropping leaflets to let a family member know a war is over. Otherwise, they might think you're trying to pull a fast one.
There's so much of this story that's like depressing as fuck. And then there's also, look, is he a murderer? A bit, yes. Was he indoctrinated into a extremely repressive culture and a military that had a specific, literally suicidal dedication to their end goals, yes. But there's also there's this interesting kind of undercurrent to all this of just how far people will go to preserve a sense of identity, both culturally and then literally, I am a soldier, I make war, and I don't want the war to be over. You know what I mean? It's really fascinating to me.
We've mentioned this before on the show. I don't remember when, but I remember having this conversation. This idea of the way that all soldiers of war, but in particular, the particular flavor of the Japanese military during World War II, this idea that they were sort of stripped of their individual identity and built from the ground up as a one-man sacrifice for the greater good of an empire. This idea that they were trained to be suicide bombers that would kill themselves in order to accomplish strategic land grabs in the conflict. And this idea that the soldiers that did not end up dying in kamikaze maneuvers were probably left so psychologically traumatized because the war ended in this thing that they were trained that their only purpose in life was to die in battle. And then that just didn't happen. And then Hiroo Onoda is that to its logical extreme because he didn't even actually really enter into battle. He had this same training and then he went somewhere and then he really wasn't allowed to fight and then the war just ended. So he didn't even get to go into battle. And the idea that just psychologically destroyed him, it doesn't justify it, obviously. And that's kind of what happens to a lot of murderers. That's kind of why people kill people, is because, like you said, something is so inextricably fused into somebody's identity that they would rather kill than let go of that or admit that part of themselves is dead. And so they sort of pass that death onto a sacrificial lamb and they murder somebody. That idea, like I said before, it's so perfectly structured to be a cautionary tale that it just feels like a Twilight Zone episode.
I want to have paid attention to everything you said, but I just can't get over the Venom on the logo on your shirt. I'm sorry.
I'm fully nude.
Well, on that note, I'm Dave Baker.
And I'm Spandrew Spice.
This has been Deep Cuts. You can find me on the internet at heydavebaker.com. You can find my book, Mary Tyler Moorhawk, a hybrid novel, graphic novel, where you can see me slowly lose my mind over the course of about 5 years, anywhere books are sold. Spandrew, where can people find you on the internet?
If you want to pay your respects to the dear beloved Papa Pricey, you can get his book, Deadbolt AI Private Eye, by going to dapricerights.com. You can follow us on social media by going to Facebook and searching Deep Cuts Podcast. You can join the Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group where we talk about the show and make memes and other cool stuff. You can join our Discord server, bit.ly.com/DeepCutsDiscord, where we talk about the show, make memes, play games, and other cool stuff as well. You can follow us on Instagram at Deep Cuts Pod. You can follow us on TikTok at Mystery Treehouse. And you can follow me on TikTok at Deadboy Detective. Deep Cuts is a production by Boy Genius Media. If you'd like to find this show and others like it, please visit boygeniusmedia.com or deepcutspod.com.
If you want to join in on post-episode discussions, please join the Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group. Finally, subscribe to our YouTube channel for additional video content.
The incidental music for this episode was created by D. Catalano, whose music can be found at wekeepoddhours.bandcamp.com. This episode of Deep Cuts was written by special guest writer Mike Bedard.